Those of us who live and visit the Chesapeake Bay have a vision of clean rivers across Maryland's eastern shore. But the truth is, all of our rivers are polluted. Virtually every river on the eastern shore is impaired. With proper education and outreach, coupled with restoration, education, and advocacy, we will clean these rivers. We must.
So I'm Zach Kelleher. I'm the Sassafras Riverkeeper, and it's my job to protect this beautiful river. The Sassafras is only about 22 miles long, but it has these really distinctive creeks on both sides that all have their own unique personalities. It's a pretty powerful little river. One of the things that's really unique and special about the Sassafras is the elevation. On the eastern shore, we don't have much elevation. So it's pretty spectacular when you come out here and just look up and see these gorgeous sand bluffs rising 80 to 100 feet up off the water. There's some incredible bird life out here. We have a lot of heron rookeries, a ton of eagles and ospreys and herons and everything you can imagine. We do get crabs up here late in the season, usually August and September, but we have a lot of catfish. And so when you're going up and down the river, you'll see a lot of pound nets that are constantly being worked by these watermen. It's filled with lotus. So when it's blooming like it is now, it's incredible. You're just surrounded by it.
And these beautiful plants have been here for probably many thousands of years. And the Takwa Indians would use these as a food source. This is almost like cabbage, so the Indians would eat it. You can actually eat the stem, a little bit more tough than celery, but very similar. And you can see the strands coming down here that bring the water up and engage in photosynthesis, soaking up carbon dioxide and putting the carbon in the mud in the bottom of the river, and then releasing oxygen for us and the fish. This is also edible. The flower of the plant doesn't taste too bad. And inside here, you can see a yellow seed pod that, after a while, is going to turn into this, a green seed pod. The seeds can be eaten raw or roasted in the oven. The tuber at the bottom of the root, or part of the root system, these are all rooted into the mud, is edible, provides you with starch. When the water gets a little bit warm, this provides some shade, which keeps the water a little bit cooler. It also, the stems of the lily pads provides muskrats with building material for their lodges.
It seems from people I've talked to that have been here their whole lives or here for the past 20 years that each year there's more and more and they're expanding. And it's great because it also reduces the amount of water chestnut. It kind of provides that natural habitat and that natural competition that blocks out invasive species, which is great. But the water chestnut's an invasive species and it's tenacious, so it still pops up in any available space. We've been battling water chestnut here in the Sassafras for about 50 years. So it's a really damaging, harmful invasive species. It grows very rapidly. If you leave an acre of it, the next year it'll be 100 acres. And it'll send out this long, feathery looking root system. And it'll go to one original rosette like this that floats on top of the surface. And it has these air sacs here, which is how it stays buoyant and floats on top of it. And then underneath here, there's these crazy, demonic looking four-spined seed pods that bury down in the mud, which are sharp enough to penetrate boots. If you step on one of those, it takes the fun out of the day really quickly. Off of that root system, 10 to 12 more plants will shoot off. So if you go down the chain here, you can see all the different ways. This is all the same plant. Each one of these will drop 18 to 20 seeds. So one water chestnut plant is capable of producing up to 120 seeds. And so what we're trying to do out here is pull them out before they drop the seeds, because these seeds can remain viable in the mud for up to 13 years. So by continuing to pull these out every year, we slowly reduce the seed bank that's in the mud. On the sassafras, we do receive some of the effects from Conowingo Dam, and every time they open the gates, the debris that comes from Pennsylvania and New York washes down, and if the winds and tides are right, it washes up into the river. The dam has been doing a good job trapping this stuff and catching it before it gets released into the bay, but then every time they open the gates, it just goes back out. I want to stress that we're not blaming the dam for putting this trash and debris into the water. All we're saying is they need to be held accountable too. If they're allowed to profit from a natural resource, they should also contribute to preserving and protecting that natural resource. Like most of the Eastern Shore, agriculture is the dominant land use. It's about 67% of the land in the Sassafras watershed.
But the bees also go on flowers, and they make what from the nectar in the flowers?
We have a program called the Sassafras Environmental Education Center.
Yes, we are going to taste the honey.
Yeah!
We garden, we harvest the vegetables, we canoe, we hike.
The leaf turns the sun's energy into food.
Our overall theme is agroecology, how agriculture can be helpful and compatible with the local ecosystem. All of that sort of wraps together for young people to have a frame of reference as to how human activity can be compatible with nature's design. So I think that's our association with the Sassafras River. It's beautiful design.
I had a monarch land on my shoulder yesterday. I like to tell people when they ask me what I do, I like to tell them that it's not a job, it's a lifestyle. It doesn't matter if it's between 9 to 5 or not. I'm out here at 6 in the morning, I'm out here at 11 o'clock at night. I just love it. And so as the Riverkeeper, I'm really the voice of the river. Since it can't speak for itself in Annapolis, and it can't speak for itself at the local town council meetings and everything, that's my job. So my job is to represent the river and do what's in the river's best interest and do whatever I can do to protect it and restore it so that we can try to get it back to the glory that it once was.
My name is Ellie Bassett. I'm the Riverkeeper for the Miles Y and Eastern Bay watershed, so collectively it's about 250 square miles. If you're coming over the Bay Bridge and you hit Kent Island, basically everything south of the Kent Narrows Bridge is part of my watershed. So I have the Eastern Bay watershed with lots of little pockets and little bays. And then as you come south and up the Miles River, you could go into St. Michael's. We have the Chesapeake Bay Maritime Museum, which is a key part of both the river and the community. You have the amazing log canoe races that happen every year, which are just beautiful to even watch. Or you could come into the Y River. One of my favorite locations, I think, is the Y Island Bridge. This river has some pretty incredible rookeries, which are nesting habitats for blue herons. You could also see many bald eagle while you're out here, which is really encouraging. Something that I personally, as Riverkeeper, am working to increase and protect is our underwater grasses, our submerged aquatic vegetation. We've seen just a tremendous comeback, and unfortunately right now the protection for that grass isn't there. So I'm working to better map those grasses, identify the species, and advocate for better protection. The hydraulic escalator dredge, which is used for the clam fishery, is a particular threat to underwater grasses. The dredge is completely catastrophic to grasses when it goes through it, but it also leaves a large sediment plume which can smother the grass. So we've been working to not only document this activity, but also to advocate for better protection for our grasses. Agriculture can also be a predominant source of pollution to our rivers. To address this, one project that we've been doing at Shore Rivers is called a two-stage ditch, where we convert a traditional V ditch to what is called a two-stage ditch, where essentially we create a bench and we widen out the bottom of that ditch to slow the nutrients and capture that sediment from entering the river. So we're actually in Prospect Bay right now, which is off of Eastern Bay, and there's just a beautiful, healthy bed of redhead grass. You can always kind of tell redhead from the others because of its distinctive leaves. You can see how it's kind of rounded. They're pretty long strands, almost like a fern. We are out here today collecting redhead grass seed, which we will then clean and send to Anne Arundel County Community College, where they will adhere it to sand, and then we will replant it in areas of the Wye River. Underwater grasses are critical to the health of the bay, and many people say that if we bring the grasses back, the bay will come back to life. Not only do they provide oxygen for underwater critters and shelter and food, but they also trap nutrients and trap sediment. So they also improve clarity and improve the water quality in general. Many people see them as a nuisance, but in fact, they're a really good indicator of health for the water quality. Generally, the Eastern Bay has better water quality than most of the rivers on the Eastern Shore and Shore Rivers. And that's mainly because the land to water ratio is very different. So there's much less land and much more water. As we go upstream into the Miles or the Wye, our land becomes much more, which means our clarity will decrease.
2.1.
Our runoff will increase and our nutrients will also increase, which means in general our water quality will be poorer as you go upstream. 7.55 pH. This is now the worst two rivers of our entire Shore Rivers watershed. So we have some work to do in these regions here, and mainly that's because of clarity, algae, and phosphorus. Our clarity was one of the worst years that we've ever seen, as Matt said. So it makes sense that we have an increased amount of sediment coming into our rivers and an even increased amount of phosphorus that's binded to that soil. A program that's unique to the Eastern Shore and the Miles Wye River specifically is our pump out boat program, which is funded by the Department of Natural Resources and kept at the Chesapeake Bay Maritime Museum. It's a program that's completely free to boaters on the Miles and Wye in an effort to educate them how to properly pump out their boat waste into our pump out boat instead of into our rivers. So it reduces nutrients entering our rivers, it reduces bacteria entering our rivers, and it promotes better water quality and better bay stewardship.
The Miles and Wye rivers are incredibly busy. You can come out here even in a rainy or cool day and there are boats up and down the rivers constantly. So far this year we pumped almost 14,000 gallons of waste out of the boats in the Miles and Wye rivers.
It's just the most wonderful service when you think that someone comes around and helps make a real effort to clean these waters and to keep them clean.
My college required that we take a science course my freshman year, so I took Intro to Environmental Science and I was completely hooked. I learned more out on the river seining with enthusiastic professors about how these rivers influence my society and my local environment than I think I really ever learned from any of my textbooks. And it inspired me to try and provide that same spark to the future generation. You guys ever heard of SAB?
Yes.
Okay, what does SAB stand for?
Submerged aquatic vegetation.
Oh my gosh, high five. Submerged aquatic vegetation. You can't expect anyone to protect what they don't know and what they don't love, so giving them the opportunity to get to know that river a little bit better, I think, is one of the best things that we could do for the future of our rivers. I'm extremely proud to be the Miles Wye Riverkeeper at Shore Rivers. I'm so fortunate to be able to work on these rivers daily, but to also bring the beauty of these rivers to others. My goal as Riverkeeper is to work myself out of my job and to experience swimmable, fishable rivers.
Well, all kinds of things happen on the Chester River, so it really is kind of the central artery of this community in terms of economy, ecology, aesthetics, culture, everything.
We were founded as a port of entry in 1706.
The Chester River is one of the last remaining rivers that is very well preserved in terms of what it may have looked like in the 18th century. We built this vessel, the schooner Sultana, and launched it right here on the Chester River to get students of all ages out on the water and teach them about the history and ecology of the region in a manner that's fun, exciting, and hands-on. So it's really almost like going in a time machine, and the river is really kind of central to everything that we do.
So this year we want to focus on the climate crisis. Well, a day in the life of a riverkeeper is always different. Most days we come in with a plan of what we're going to work on, and that can range from pursuing enforcement issues, regulatory issues, advocacy, water quality monitoring, and science. The biggest threats to the Chester River are nutrient pollution and sediment pollution, and that leads to algal blooms, which leads to deoxygenated dead zones and a host of different problems. And most of that pollution comes from agriculture in the Chester River. Shore Rivers has made a really strong effort to work alongside of our farmers and work with our agricultural community because they use this river too, and most of the farmers care about the environment.
The cover crop is what we do to take up nutrients that may not have been taken up by the corn plant that would have otherwise leached or run off. What we're learning is that as we increase the diversity of the cover crops, we're building diversity in the soil, but also diversity in the ecological system around us. Out here we've got about 9 different plants. We've got clover, vetch, turnips, radishes, cereal rye, wheat. There's a little edible turnip. So the more photosynthesis that occurs on your field, the longer the plants are growing, the more long-term it is. We're actually sequestering carbon into the soil, which helps solve climate change. Look at that.
We're working hard to reduce all sources of pollution, and that includes, we'll say, urban runoff.
When it rains here, there's literally like a class 5 rapid going down the curbs, heading right down High Street. And the problem with that for the river is that can just kind of overwhelm the water quality in that area where that's dumping in. And because it's bringing things like oil on the pavement or garbage, but also it's generally the pavement is hotter than any other surrounding area. So we can really inject warm, like poorly oxygenated water into the system, and that can really quickly degrade the water quality wherever that runoff is entering the Chester. And in our case, it's right along the edge of the town.
And then this is also a public space that's used a lot for festivals, for Downrigging Weekend, the Tea Party Festival in the spring. So, we don't have a lot of room to do things to put a huge stormwater treatment area. So that's why we really want to look at a strategy of putting smaller facilities all the way up the hill to help treat that water slowly, as opposed to one big facility down right here in this area. The other thing we have going on right here is you can see there's a line of mulch and debris right here. And it got here because it floated up on the tide. This area used to flood maybe a few times a year with tidal flooding. And now it floods multiple times per week. So that's something that we're thinking more and more about, how we can address the climate crisis and the rising tides here in the Eastern Shore. Yay! So this is Rosin Creek here. I grew up here. Both my parents grew up here in Chestertown. The kids that I'm raising are actually going to be the 4th generation Crumbauers here in Chestertown. It's beautiful right now, but every summer we get a pretty significant algal bloom fueled by nutrient pollution. And when that happens, we see Lucy has been fishing here today. She can't fish, I can't fish, can't kayak or paddleboard or anything like that because of the algal bloom. So that's one of the reasons why I'm a riverkeeper, because I feel so passionate about changing that situation. On the positive side, we've seen the return of grass beds. My dad grew up just on the other side of the Chester River Bridge here, and he tells stories when he was growing up. To get out their boat to the channel, there was so much grass they'd have to drag a box spring to create a clearing through so they could get in and out. And when I was a kid, there was no grass anywhere. And just in the past 4 or 5 years, we've seen that really start to rebound. Improving water quality is one reason that's happening.
In Chestertown, we did a big sewage plant upgrade. I know we've had a focus in the rural areas on septic upgrades.
But also, the Department of Natural Resources, some volunteers, and Shore Rivers have been working hard to plant grasses as well. The Chester is traditionally known as a very muddy river, but where those grass beds are in those areas, the water's become much clearer. So water clarity is about 1.5 feet right here, and it was a lot higher than this before we had the rain over the past couple days. So rain really impacts our water clarity here because we have more sediment that gets washed into the river when it rains. We actually had probably the best view when we bought this property because it was just wide open. But to me, it's so much more important to have that buffer that protects our waterways. You can see all the things that we've done. We've enhanced our buffer, planted trees, converted a lot of our turf grass to meadow, which all helps absorb those nutrients and hold sediment in place. We have not put down a single ounce of fertilizer anywhere in this property. Nutrient pollution makes your grass green. It's what makes our creek green too. And I really hope more people start to kind of adopt that aesthetic and create more buffers on their waterfront properties. My vision for the Chester River is to have a clean, healthy river that's swimmable, fishable,
nice and healthy, grass everywhere,
and can be enjoyed by the entire community. You know, we're getting there. The data shows in the past decade or so that water quality has been slowly improving. So we're headed in the right direction. It's a lot of work to do, but we are making progress, which is encouraging.
The greatest part about the chop tank is that it changes every couple miles. When you're down in Tillman Island and off the mouth of Harris Creek and Broad Creek, you're in this really vast, wide open area. And then the further you start coming upriver, once you go under the bridge coming into Cambridge, things start to narrow down a little bit, and then you start to see some more of the natural features. The salt marshes really start to kick in. The shorelines become a little less developed. You really start to get a sense of what this was like hundreds of years ago. The chop tank in and of itself has about 1,000 square miles of its watershed that drains into the river. And of those 1,000 square miles, the dominant land use there is agriculture. But then the water itself is used by many different folks. We've got commercial crab fishing, the white perch and the rockfish spawning in the Chop Tank River is unlike no other river.
Look at that!
And then from the recreational side, you've got a lot of people that love to get into the small creeks and do fishing via kayaks or on the shoreline.
Virtually nobody has seen or got any idea that this is the way the river is up here. This is what the land used to look like before the Europeans got here. Deep, thick topsoil, very spongy, absorbed all the precipitation. Only about 10 or 15% of it would have run off as surface runoff. We've changed all that. It was thought among the people that came here with the wherewithal to alter the land that if you left your land forested, you're ne'er-do-well. Civilizing it, controlling it, making it produce crops, making it produce income. This was considered the ideal. With this one loss of forest, we've changed the entire hydrological regime of all of our rivers. And that's at least a fourth and maybe more of the problems of Chesapeake Bay. It's only 26% forested. If this were all still forested, you wouldn't see this mud. You wouldn't get the discharge of phosphorus. You wouldn't get the discharge of nitrogen. Water flows downhill in response to gravity. The forest controls that flow.
One of my favorite moments is getting out, right before sunrise and diving in the water and swimming a mile or two. We fight every day to make sure that our rivers are swimmable all the time, which unfortunately they aren't. I organized a swim across the Chop Tank River to support clean water. And this swim was scheduled for May in 2018. And I'll say it was the first time the river turned around and kicked me in the butt and gave me a reality shock of what we're really working with. The swim got canceled because the water quality was so polluted. We had 10 inches of rain fall the week leading up to the swim, and our bacteria readings were sky high, out of the roof. And so we could not put swimmers in the water that day, and that crushed me. Our water isn't blue, and that's just a matter of the fact. We have brown water, and that messes with a lot of things, namely the clarity, allowing sun to penetrate through the water column and help to grow our underwater grasses and all of those great things. We're a science-based organization, and we pride ourselves in using science to figure out our approach to how we're going to restore our waterways. So we measure water clarity every time we're out on the water because it's really important to have an understanding of what those conditions are. Up on the upper part of the chop tank, it's unfortunate, but I'd say the average depth of clarity is less than 2 feet.
So let's dive into everyone's favorite river, the Chop Tank. How many of you are on the Chop Tank River here tonight? All right, that's great.
We take all the water quality data that we collect throughout the season and we develop a report card.
You've got so much land up in this.
It grades the rivers and it allows us to show that in a way that's understandable by the community.
The upper Chop Tank River, nitrogen and phosphorus were the culprits there, and it brought it down from a C+ to a C.
The Chop Tank River is the epicenter of not only oyster harvesting, but also oyster restoration.
I run the largest oyster hatchery on the east coast of Maryland. We primarily produce larvae for restoration, but we're also producing larvae, spat, and seed for use in aquaculture and the wild fishery. We are really conveniently located on the Chop Tank River. Yeah. Our setting pier is right here, so when we are doing our large-scale spat on shell restoration efforts, we can physically move them from this tank and right onto our planning vessel. We're very close to being finished with the little Chop Tank restoration.
I know, there's just a few acres left.
Yep.
We've got 3 of the 5 large-scale oyster restoration sanctuaries on the Chop Tank River, namely Harris Creek, the Tredaven River, and the Little Chop Tank. Harris Creek is notably the largest oyster restoration project in the world, and recent studies have shown that all the oysters in Harris Creek can filter all the water in the creek in about 10 days, which is really impressive. They also accumulate nitrogen. They pull nitrogen out of the system and they release it as nitrogen gas. And the estimates currently are that all the oysters in Harris Creek will be able to remove 1 million pounds of nitrogen in just 1 decade.
I see what our rivers look like, but I also see that we have a lot of opportunity to improve and clean up our waterways. And one of those ways is working directly with the agricultural community. This farm behind me is managed by the Hutchisons. They work throughout Caroline and Talbot counties. They're one of the most forward-thinking farmers around this region.
We try to be environmentally responsible, and I think most farmers are. It doesn't make us unique, but we try some new things, different things such as the nitrogen bioreactors to remove nitrate in the surface water runoff that we have. We have 3 of those. We also manage nitrogen as closely as we can. This cornfield behind me had 4 different applications during the year.
After I got out of grad school, lived in Annapolis for about a year, knew I wanted to get out of the city. Found this little place up here, about 30 acres, and half of it, about 15 acres, is in corn tillage. Very poor, acidic soil. Corn never got over about that high. So as soon as we took it over, we terminated the tillage agreement and immediately began to let it grow up. In 3 or 4 years, the little pine trees started to show up. Then the little hardwood started to come up in there. And that's been 53 years ago. This is what we wanted. We wanted to see it renew itself and heal itself. And it didn't cost anything.
It's all about a balance, and I strongly believe that humans and nature can interact in a balanced way. My vision for a healthy river is one where our natural resources are blossoming like you wouldn't believe, but then also one where our communities are engaged in the river, but not only that, they prioritize water quality. And that's from the local government right down to your homeowner. I would love for my son to have greater recreational and natural resource opportunities on the Chop Tank River than what we have today.
Oh, he's standing.
Woo! Is that your knee?
See you on the river.